wife and I developed a project called Wilderness Youth Project in Santa Barbara, California. It just literally, I missed it because I'm here in Uganda right now. I'm in northern Uganda in a refugee camp at our training center here in northern Uganda near the border with South Sudan. And I missed our 25th year anniversary for Wilderness Youth Project,
Oh,
which
dang.
is an organization that we started in Santa Barbara, California, teaching origin skills and connecting youth with not only nature around them, but the nature within them. And that was a big part of the journey too, because as we started to do this work with, doing bow drill fires and wild harvesting food and making debris huts and being able to do these skills that our ancestors have done together with especially inner city kids,
Mm,
we started to have a lot of these kids come back from these like weekend journeys and after school programs saying, how do you live like this? How
yeah.
do you actually live in a way that is in close relationship with that which gives you life? And out of that journey came Quail Springs, which kind of launched me into the permaculture world. Took my first PDC from Bill Mollison. I realized I wanted to teach after I took that. I was so inspired by him, even as cranky as he was. He also had such a love of the world around him, and it's what made him cranky because he saw people who weren't living with so much common sense, and I think that drove him crazy. And it was something that it was so endearing about him as well. Quail Springs is a 400-acre property surrounded on three sides by national forest and is a dryland site. It's in a rain shadow of a large mountain called Inwinmuhu, which is a mountain that is the center of the universe for the Shumash people in the area where we live there, and a very sacred, special place.
In
And
California, right?
in California, yeah. And this particular land, because it's in a rain shadow, is uh, basically 6 inches of rain a year. Or those of you who
Wow.
are working metrics, about 100, just over 150 mil of rain a year.
Jeez.
And it is in a juniper pinyon woodland at about 3,800 feet, which really looks like New Mexico when you see the picture here. And it was the place where I cut my teeth with a lot of the how do you actually work with planting the rain?
Mm,
How do you change the story of a collapsed hydrology into a restoration project? How do you work with how that rain that little bit of rain lands on the ground, and how do you turn it into something that's life giving?
yeah.
And over the years, and those of you who work in dry lands know it's a slow process. But what it did teach me was that when you harmonize with natural patterns, it elevates everything you're doing. It creates this synergy that you just cannot do on your own. And again, it's very humbling
Mm,
to see the power of nature do her work when you start to work with her rather than push against her. And I feel like so much of my work these days is about helping people to see a different way to work with the power of nature. There's a spring that's actually up in the national forest above the site there. And when we bought the land, the owners we bought it from thought the spring had died, and most of the springs in the Cuyama Valley had completely dried up, and so this spring was only moist at night. There was only like a half gallon of water coming out of that spring at night, and then during the day it would dry up. So the owners who had it then never traveled up there at night. So they saw that this was, they thought the spring was just dead and it was just a little bit of moisture on subsurface. And we started working with the springs up there, and we started replanting. And I remember people in the valley. It's a farming valley, very kind of conventional farming in the area, but it had been a farming community for many, many years. And they said, "Oh, you have to cut out the sycamores, you have to cut out the willows, you have to cut out all the vegetation in the wet areas to get more water." And
Mm.
I know that's a misnomer. I know that's a misunderstanding, because when you cut those systems out, you get a flush of water for about 2 years, and then the whole hydrology collapses underneath that. And so we did the opposite. We planted thousands of willows, and we replanted the cottonwoods that were there, and literally everybody thought we were crazy. They're just like, "No, no, don't do that. You're going to be, you're going to destroy your available water." And
Oh,
so where we're at now is pretty crazy. They're getting almost 60 gallons a minute now out of that same spring in the
wow.
dry season. There was an organization in West Africa and Liberia, and it was right when the civil war, brutal civil war, was ending in
Yes.
Liberia and West Africa. And this organization, they had a lot of work that they were doing with helping people grieve, and some of the people that they were working with on this large scale in the north of Liberia talked about the need for the landscape to be in a healing journey, for the heart of the human that lives there to be in a healing journey.
Mm.
So if you sit back and think about that how our hearts and the heart of the land are just, they're intertwined. And when you have a degrading landscape, you see a degrading culture in a landscape.
Yes.
And she's like, "Well, I think you need to go to Liberia." I'm like, "Well, I'm not available. It's like I've got Quail Springs and I've got work to do, and I'm like not wanting, I can't do it. I'm sorry." And she says,
Yes.
I know, but when can you go?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean, when can I go?" I said, "I can't go. I've got all this world." She says, I know." And she just kind of closed her eyes and shook her head. She said, "Yeah, but when can you go?" And this went back and forth. We were at lunch together, and
Brilliant.
it started penetrating my heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, very within a week, I was decided to go. And 3 weeks later, I was in Liberia for my first trip to Africa, post-war Liberia, and
Wow.
going to a place just a couple of years before that, the UN said was the most dangerous place in the world. I started to get requests to teach all over Africa, because people were saying, "Oh, he has experience in a war-torn area," and it really went well. Like we had some really good demonstration work that we did, and some uptake in the community and all that. But I started to see the industry for the first time, and what I realized is that I have limited life energy. And if you think about permaculture and the principles of energy efficiency,
Mm.
how do you be efficient with your energy as a human being? I can see that there's the world ecological foundation is quickly being mined and collapsing. And how can I leverage my life energy to have the most impact in the world around me? And that question kept coming up in my mind. It was something that kept flowing through my desire to be an impactful human being in a positive way in the world. And what kind of came out of that, Jesse, is this this idea that I have to leverage what I'm doing. I need to stack functions, so to speak, and work with existing systems. And I
Mm.
feel like a lot of the permaculture movement has just kind of stayed in its groove of serving homesteaders and gardeners, and not the 2/3 world, but the 1/3 world. And I also realized that a lot of traditional cultures don't have the cultural mechanisms around erosion and degradation in a landscape. So their cultural lens and their systems of culture have evolved with an intact ecology. And so now you have these systems that are ecological systems of degradation that are so massive that the traditional cultural approaches don't actually work in those systems anymore because of the degradation. One of the things that started to surface was this need tool up other permaculturists to how would they enter into this humanitarian development space, because it is an industry. It is a large multi-billion-dollar industry that is working with some of the most vulnerable people and landscapes in the world. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. When you think of the principle of permaculture, turning a problem into a solution, I was like, wow, there is an opportunity here to actually leverage my life energy. I was bringing kind of my fresh permaculture lens, my ignorant kind of way. I didn't understand the industry, because that's
Yeah.
different than the people. The
Yes.
industry is this whole different journey where there's these mechanisms and this programming structures that very well could be one of the most impactful ways permaculture touches the ground.
I would say that for the past, it's been 25 years of practice. I would say it is life. Walking through the world as a member of the ecosystem and being in a set of reciprocal relationships, the kind that permaculture principles teach us. I would say that when you marinate and sort of immerse yourself in the principles, you remember the kind of nature that you are.